I'm super embarrassed. I don't know why, but I don't know. Like every time
We're
I have
friends now. Just deep breaths. Just
just breathe. Oh, I just
on.
noticed your
I
shirt.
Oh yeah, I got this a million years ago. Innova is actually a terrible consultancy, but there was one tech meetup for women in Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
and I went to it, and it was great. But then they never had another one. But it's a really comfy shirt, so I've kept it all this time.
That looks amazing. Except the Innova part.
Yeah, I thought about like, oh, can I just like scratch that off or something? But
Okay, so first of all, I didn't mention this before, but thank you so much for taking your time today to come and
my
talk to
pleasure.
me. And yeah, I don't know, it's also like first time meeting you, so yeah, I feel super fortunate to have this chance. Um,
Me too.
and yeah, basically the whole purpose is to just interview some people I really look up to. And yeah, you're obviously like one of the people. As I mentioned before, I got in touch on LinkedIn and I told you like the whole story. So yeah, I guess it's time to like get to the questions. My first question to you is, can you tell me about your journey into software engineering? What inspired you to pursue this field?
I'm not exactly sure, but I think if I had to guess, I would say video games. I think like a lot of programmers, I played games when I was a kid, and I
Mm-hmm.
thought it was the coolest thing ever. And I played all of them on a Game Boy or on a computer. And playing them on a computer, I played games with mods.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can play Counter-Strike and things like that, which was originally a mod, or things like Dota. And the thought that you could take a game and kind of make it your own or do your own
Mm-hmm.
thing with it was really cool to me.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, I tried to learn programming, but I was terrible in school. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. Um, but I would definitely say like my love of computers, my interest in technology, and then my love of like designing things, like interactive things, is kind of what brought me into the profession.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I see. Um, and before like you got into like computer science or like programming, did you have something else you were interested in and you wanted to like pursue maybe?
I have so many things. I have a new hobby every month, just about. I've been a wildland firefighter before. I've done
Really?
photography. Yeah.
Wow.
I've moved furniture. I've been a waiter. Uh, I've uh, I've done cooking. I used to work at a market. I I really like talking to people, which is funny because I often say that I don't like people, but also I do. Um, it's just tiring, I guess. I like making things. And
Mm-hmm.
I got into software engineering because I wanted to make a website for my photos. And then that sort of got out of hand and I started to get work and stuff. But I think I just like making things. And one of the things that's great about software is now that everyone has a computer and they're so accessible, it's relatively easy to get started. Because if you have a computer anyways, then there really are no startup costs other than time.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of how much can you read and understand, and then figure out a way to test for yourself to kind of learn it,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
So being able to make a website and stuff like that, I love it. And one of the coolest things is that because it's a digital form of creation,
Mm-hmm.
iteration is very easy, right? You know, if you make a painting and it's terrible, um, sometimes it feels like you have to start over from the beginning, if you don't really know what to adjust to make it look the way you want. But I find that, like with a website, it's much easier to make small changes. At least for me, it's much easier to make
Mm-hmm.
small changes to get towards what I want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really like digital stuff for that reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, first of all, it's a good point that you mentioned that programming is like art and you can express yourself through it. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
I don't hear that really often, you know? It's more looked at as something more technical, but if you really think about it, it is a
I
type of
mean, art
art.
art is itself is technical. I mean, like if you just think about the pigments alone
Mm-hmm.
and the way that like certain pigments didn't used to exist because we didn't have the chemistry to create them, and the ones that did exist were made of toxic metals like cadmium and so on. Like we all humans are very good at encoding and decoding things.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you watch a movie or you look at a painting, you're not seeing a real image per se. You're seeing a representation of an image, either mediated through a camera or mediated through the artist's eyes and their hands and whatever materials they had at hand. But humans are really good at decoding these things. You look at this moving picture and you see it as a window into another world or
Mm-hmm.
a different time. You read a book and you see these little squiggles on a page, but your brain decodes them and creates this whole mental image and this big story. And I I'm just sort of in love with that process, I guess, no matter how it comes about. I just love the way that you can represent anything as anything else, sort of,
Mm-hmm.
in some ways. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, let me ask you the second question. Was there a particular person you looked up to or an event that significantly influenced your decision to become a software engineer?
Yeah. Um, that one's hard to say. I think I used to play Game Boy, little handheld
Mm-hmm.
Nintendo thing with my mom when I was very, very little. Like we would be on her bed and she would be playing Super Mario Land or The Legend of Zelda, and I would be right next to her watching her do it. And sometimes I would play, but if I got to a boss, it was too hard, and so I had to have her do it. But like that's probably what when I got into video games, that was like my first entrance into that. So I think that might be the beginning of my love for computers. Additionally, throughout high school, I again, I don't like people, but also I like people. But often I can be very solitary. And
Mm-hmm.
so the computer was kind of my way of interacting with things. So just having a computer around that my mother got me is another significant thing. And then before being a software engineer, I was working at Whole Foods as a cashier.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned a bit of web design and stuff, making a website for my photos. And then through being a cashier and talking to customers, I found customers that needed websites. And so that was sort of the beginning of my career. But it's only thanks to my wife, Ashley, that I was able to actually quit working at Whole Foods and start doing that career full time, even before it would pay enough for me to eat, because she could support me. And it took me I quit Whole Foods and was working for 9 months trying to, get a real programming job.
Mm-hmm.
And I lost hope at the end, right before I did find something. But I couldn't have done that without my wife. If she wasn't there to support me while I was learning that stuff, then I would have starved, or been
Mm-hmm.
homeless or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say pre-software programming, it's my mother and my wife. Post-software programming, I have looked up to people in the Rust community for a long time because they're so freaking intelligent. People like Nico Matsakis and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Rafe Levine, especially because of his work for GUIs, graphical user interfaces, which I'm very interested in human-computer interaction in
Mm-hmm.
general. So I really look at a lot of their work. And it's cool to be able to speak to people like that now that I go to conferences and now that I work at Amazon because a lot of them work there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I would say that the REST community itself, it's a really wonderful, welcoming community. I I often feel like I'm not a real programmer and stuff like that, but no one in the REST community has ever made me feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
Like my issues are totally internal, thankfully. And everyone I've spoken to in the REST community has just been wonderful and welcoming and patient with me specifically, and I really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, for sure. Rust community is super friendly. I'm also involved in other communities as well because I work as a DevOps, but Rust one was especially friendly in my opinion. Maybe because
Mhm.
there's so many like young people and there's a lot of people that are starting from the very beginning and they like
Mhm.
you're naturally going to be like nice and like try to help each other, you know? So yeah, I love Rust community. And I also want to say this. Yeah, I mentioned you off recording that I wanted to pursue career in biochemistry. And funny story about me is that my dad was trying to motivate me to learn programming, but I think I was also super bad at it. Like I hated going to this like programming school. And yeah, then he got into like Kubernetes, Docker, and he would always like call me and tell me, Irene, like come to me, I'll show you cool stuff on the computer. And I was like, oh
Mhm.
god, not this again, you know. And
Yeah.
I was super not into it. And then like it was the final summer when I'm supposed to graduate from high school and go to university. And my mom told me there is some like program for women, actually for girls, sorry, girls in STEM, and it was like a 2 week summer camp. And she told me you should just try it out. You know, your dad is also going to be happy. Like, it's free. There's like cool people from uh, Microsoft. I think it was Google, Intel, and yeah, you can experience some stuff. And yeah, I went through the summer camp, and in 2 weeks I decided that I wanted to do computer science. And you should have seen my
Oh, that's
dad.
awesome.
He was so happy, but it was so fun because he was trying to motivate me for like maybe like 5 years or more. And then
Yeah.
I mean, moms have like a different power, you know. Like she just
Yeah.
advised me to do that, and then it like worked out. So yeah, I'm also like super thankful to my mom. The moms are amazing. Like I'm really
Moms
thankful.
are amazing.
Yeah.
I think it's really hard for most people to relate to programming. I know it is for me because a lot of the things that you think of doing with programming are maybe like, I don't know, like finances or something. Like
Mhm.
I'm not big into tracking my finances very closely. I'm not very good at math. I don't do advanced chemistry or physics or anything like that. I don't really use calculators that much because I just don't have need for them. So for me, being able to do websites was really what made me see programming as a thing that I could use to do something I wanted to do because a website is this cool visual thing. You know, it's not just the
Mhm.
code, but it's something that you see, you can look at next to the code and change it, you know, by writing a few words. And that was really, I think, the spark that I'm like, oh no, I do like this. This is fun.
Mhm.
You have to find something that you care about and you have to relate that to programming, you know. It's very hard if you come to it and you try and learn it and then relate it to something. I think you have to relate it first and then try and learn it. If you don't have that thing that you're trying to do, it's, at least for me, very hard to understand things, you know, because I think, well, is this important? Why do I need to know this? What's the point, you know?
Mhm. Mhm. And you know, you mentioned that you were into photography and art. And do you
Yeah,
think like doing those have helped you with programming? Like, I think you
I
can
would say
learn.
the art, yeah.
I think you can
Oh,
learn how to
continue.
code, but you cannot learn how to be creative. Or maybe you can. I'm not sure. But I think
I
since you
think
had.
it's a practice, right? It's
Uh huh.
like most things. If you keep doing it, eventually you learn all the things that you don't like. You know,
Uh
oh, I
huh.
don't like the way this turned out. I don't like the way this turned out. And you can't help but kind of just remember all the mistakes you've made.
Mm.
But then that helps you focus on like making the things that you want to make in the way that you want to make them, you know, because it's like self-expression. It's what am I trying to say? And then you do the work and it's
Mhm.
like, okay, does that say what I wanted it to say, or in the case of programs, does it do what I wanted it to
Mhm.
do, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Okay. The next question is really long. Um. Okay. So yeah, once we were chatting some time ago, and you mentioned that you often get ideas right before falling asleep or just waking up. Do you have a particular process or routine for managing and prioritizing the many ideas you come up with? Because personally, I have abandoned a lot of projects that I have started, unfortunately. Um, so yeah, like how do you really decide like which project you should pursue and which one you should abandon because time is limited, you know?
Yeah, I think it's about what you're trying to accomplish. I think that the mark of most programmers is that they enjoy starting things more than
Yeah.
enjoy finishing them, you know? I think that that's very typical of programmers, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. Um, Starting things is very exciting, and it's often much more exciting than learning something that exists. It's nice to like put your mark on something.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of ideas, I used to really worry about productivity and things like that. Like,
Mm.
America was founded by Puritans, and a big part of Puritans is that they reach heaven by working incredibly hard and doing nothing else. And so Americans have this awful, all-encompassing work ethic where when we meet each other, we don't ask like, "Who are you?" or like, "Why? What do you like to do?" We say like, "What's your job?" You know? And I think that a lot of people coming into programming, they're very, very focused on that aspect of like, how do I commodify myself? How do
Mm-hmm.
I like this thing, but I'm doing it so that I can get money because I need food and housing and healthcare. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really sad actually that that's the case because to me, any form of self-expression, I wish that I could just do it without worrying about what other people
Mm-hmm.
think, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
um, I don't think that great artists worry so much about whether their art will be well received or not. They make it because they think it says something important, you know. Um, but we do have to eat at the end of the day. So I
Mm-hmm.
would say for anyone that's worried about keeping track of their ideas, don't worry so much about it. Like I don't have a notepad by my bedside or anything anymore. Don't beat yourself up for not being productive enough because it'll just make you feel bad and it won't make you better at
Mm-hmm.
the thing that you're trying to get better at. Easier said than done. I still beat myself up. Um, and to really just set goals. To me, self-worth is a promise that you make to yourself. You know, like if I feel good if I say that I'm going to do something to myself and then I go do it. And conversely, I feel bad when I say I'm going to do something and I don't. So it's very easy to make big New Year's resolutions and so on, you know, to say, I'm going to make the best game ever. I'm going to do so and so. I'm going to exercise every day and whatever. And I think most people that attempt that fail and then they feel bad. And I think that the answer is not to avoid trying, but to just start from the bottom and work your way up instead of starting from the top, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Not to say that I'm going to make the best program, but that I'm going to start writing a program today, or I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to draw a teeny picture this big, or I'm going to open my book even if I don't read it or something. You know, like starting, I think, is often the hardest part. And I think that if people focused more on just starting the thing and not worrying if they kept with it, that they'd be much better off because it's okay to put down things that you start, you know. It's okay to think that you'll enjoy something and then find out that you don't. And it's a waste of time to beat yourself up and wish that you were a different person, to wish I often have this sense of I want to want something. I
Mm-hmm.
want to go outside and paint, but I don't want to go outside and paint. I want to
Mm-hmm.
stay inside in my underpants and play video games. And it's you just have to have compassion for yourself, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Like I almost try and look at myself as like two people, you know. One of them that feels bad because they're not doing the things they're supposed to do, and then the other one that's like, "Hey, that's okay. Like
Mm-hmm.
you'll get there eventually, you know. Just find something else to do and don't worry about it."
It's
And
like it's like the angel and the devil sitting on your shoulder.
yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, it's just like that. You know, you have to have love for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, love is not based on like what did you do for me? You know, it's just you just love yourself, you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
because you know that you're trying hard and that has to kind of be enough, you know. Anytime that love comes from an external source, then you don't have control over it. You know, if your pride is all in your work, then when you get fired, you have no pride. If your pride comes from your significant other and you break up, then you have no pride again. You know, like those things, they have to come from within, and they don't have to be big, you know, to have a good effect. Just consistently keeping little promises to yourself, I think, is the core of that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That and writing things down. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're very good at remembering things, you know. Um, just write things down. There are many ideas that you'll have that you won't know what to do with. Just write it down. And if it comes up later, it does. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. If you're worried about things, write them down and then don't worry about it because it's in your
Mm-hmm.
book, so you won't forget it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's that's the sort of thing that helps me to kind of don't stay in your head, you know? Get the
Mm-hmm.
thoughts and everything out of your head, put them somewhere else so that you can move on instead of getting stuck in a loop.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. I think that's also a good lesson to me. Yeah, being compassionate and nice to yourself is really important.
It's
Especially,
hard too.
yeah,
It's
especially
yeah.
when sometimes you can even end up burnout. That's something I'm really afraid
Yes.
of. So I think you have to take care of yourself. Yeah, that's a good point. Um, oh, this is a good question. How do you stay updated with the latest advancements in technology, and what resources do you find most valuable? Are there any specific blogs, podcasts, or meetups you would recommend to other developers?
Yeah, I mean, really go to any meetup. If you are
Mm-hmm.
if you are looking to be a developer, go talk to other developers. Either get a job as a developer or go to a meetup and talk to developers that have jobs. To me, networking is the easiest way to kind of become part of a network, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
if you want to be a developer, talk to developers and find any way you can to do that. So the best meetup is the one that you can get to regularly.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as like internet resources, I read the Rust newsletter every week. This Week in Rust, that's what it's
Mm-hmm.
called. And I that pretty much will link or surface any blog I'd want to read. I mean, I've read Nico's blog a lot. I've read Without Boats' blog, although they're becoming more of a programming blogger and less of a Rust focused blogger. But I I really just try to read as much of that stuff as I can. And I there are lots of different kinds of blogs, right? A lot of it is not useful per se. I think that
Mm-hmm.
on the internet, there are kind of only two kinds of content that we get. There's stuff for very, very, very beginning beginners, because it's
Mm-hmm.
fairly easy to write those things. And then stuff for experts, you know, like research papers and stuff like that. And there's a big lack, a void of kind of intermediate things in between. And so I think that I don't know if I could point someone to specific stuff other than to like, you know, try and have a high level view of just what's happening and then try to set goals for yourself again about like what's important. So I might be reading a lot of blogs about some sort of HTTP thing that's relative to something I'm doing at work. Um, or I'll be reading about certain design things that I want to know more about. I would say like it's best to kind of be focused in whatever you're trying to do. Try and don't expect knowledge to just be collected by you, you know, like you're not a cup collecting water. It's more like a process where you combined with this information, you take an action, and through that action comes knowledge, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't worry so much about the source so much as just try and be deliberate about what you are learning and why it's important, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that might, you might even say, well, like, I don't know what's important. And that in itself is something to learn about. Think of why write programs? What is the point of all this for me? Am I
Mm-hmm.
just making money? Okay, look up how to get a job at the highest paying programming thing. Do I love authentication or crypto or web or something like that? Then, you know, learn more about that. But specifically, it's take action based on what you're learning because that's how you know if you actually understand it or not, if you can put it to use. Knowledge without being able to put it to use is not very useful, you know?
Mm-hmm. 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 Agreed. I also want to mention that you also have your own blog, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I call it a digital garden. It's
Yeah,
a
Digital
Zelda's
Garden.
page. I think a lot of people that start blogs, like with being a programmer, you worry about how to commodify yourself, how to sell yourself
Mm-hmm.
to whomever, jobs or the programming community at large. And I really value self-expression. And so for me, my website is just specifically for expressing myself and not I don't really have a goal. It's just like I like sharing this stuff, and that's why I do it. And I try and avoid. I don't want to be a thought leader. I don't want to create content. I just want
Mm-hmm.
to like share neat things, and I think that's what helps me kind of focus on the right stuff. Uh, if anyone has ever tried to turn something they love into a business before, they may have experienced this, where you love the thing when you do it for yourself, but when you start to do it for other people, you find that you hate it because you're not expressing yourself
Mm-hmm.
anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so just make sure um, that you find ways to express yourself, not someone else's ideas, but your own. Um, it can be something stemming from someone else's ideas, but talk about how you feel about them or what they mean to you, and and kind of focus on your own voice, so to speak. You know, it's
Mm-hmm.
like the web is there to help you figure out who you are as well as who everyone else is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Wow, that was really awesome to hear about that. And I also thought about like creating content before, but I think creating content is so difficult, and then you also had to like satisfy like people exactly what you
Yep.
just mentioned. And yeah, I don't know. I was too scared, so I decided it's not the way to
I
go.
yeah, I've thought about it, but like I know a YouTuber who got really, really popular and they liked parts of it, but also, yeah, it's not a very good paying job. There's not security. You're not going to get
Mm-hmm.
healthcare that way. Like in the in the capitalist economy that most of us live in, it kind of sucks,
Mm-hmm.
It's much easier, in my opinion, to work for a corporation like Amazon and then spend the other half of your time doing whatever you want than it is to kind of make your dream into your job, if that
Yeah,
makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah, for sure. Let's move on to the next question.
Sure.
Yeah, I really wanted to hear this from you. What role do you think software engineers should play in advocating for accessibility and inclusivity in tech? Can you share an example of how you advocated for these principles in your work?
I can, I mean, maybe I've been helpful just by existing. It's tough. There are a lot of when I got my first programming job, I was very much interested in making programming a more open place for other women and basically for anyone that wasn't a guy. And it's really hard. A lot of businesses will, if you're a woman, they will put you on the diversity and inclusion committee or whatever. You'll do all this work to make things better and to identify issues with including people and things like that. And
Mm,
you make a letter, and the CEO reads it, and they're like, "Oh, great, thanks." And then you're like, "So, what are you gonna do?" And they're like, "Oh, well, don't worry about that." It's it's very it's very easy to fall in this trap of like being the diversity mascot or the look, we're doing something for a company when they don't really intend to do something. And so that really bothered me. But then I kind of turned it around. It's like instead of trying to change the company, I focus on the people that I actually want to help, which is people like you or like me,
mm-hmm.
other developers, like so I like to mentor people. I make sure that, I meet new people coming into my organization, whether they're men or women or it doesn't matter really. Because I like to find people that kind of don't have that confidence and just need a little bit of a push or something. Someone to be like, "Am I terrible?" And you're like, "No, you're not terrible. You're fine." Um, because I think you can do a lot of good that way. Uh, so I would say if you are trying to like make things more inclusive, the best way to do it is don't go through someone else. Just
Mm-hmm.
find someone that looks like they don't feel included or that says that they don't feel included
Mm-hmm.
and include them. Ask their opinion, when you're in meetings and everyone has been talking about something, don't settle the matter until you've said, "Hey, what do you think?" We've talked before. Um, Basically, yeah, just try yourself to deliberately include people. Um, if someone doesn't speak up, ask them and make sure that they don't feel like saying anything. And maybe they don't, and that's fine. But some people are very afraid to, again, make that first step. And so by helping someone else make that first step, I find that to be the best use of my time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I have a lot to say about accessibility, but I don't want to skip to that if you have any questions.
Mm-hmm. Mm. If you have anything to add about accessibility specifically, yeah, please. I would love to like listen to that.
If you are a web developer, you are the last kind of defense, you know. You have to implement things that usually designers have designed, and not every designer is aware of accessibility. And so if you are a web developer, you are the last person that can do something, and it's really up to you to make sure that you put out a good whatever you're making, a product or a project or anything. Because after you, there's no one else to make sure, you know? You are
Mm-hmm.
the last person in the line, and if you don't do it, then no one will at that point. So that's a lot of responsibility, of course. But you may not even it doesn't work out. I've had many, many meetings with designers where I will say, like, this is not accessible. I've run the accessibility
Mm-hmm.
tests and they say that the text is too small. This text is not visible because of its color. And the designers will say, well, we think it's fine, you know, and you can only argue so much. But yeah, always strive to do that stuff if you're a web developer. The other one is if you're not a web developer, and even if you work on a back end thing, um, try to have empathy for your user and the confusion that they might experience when using your whatever you've created. The one that I'm constantly fighting for is with error messages. There are two kinds of error messages, ones that the user can do something about and ones that they
Mm-hmm.
can't do something about.
Mm-hmm.
Let them know the difference. Let them know when something is a bug and they need to talk to you.
Mm-hmm.
Have a call to action, you know? If you have an error that's a bug, make sure you say, this is a bug, file a bug here. If you have an error that the user did not set something, tell them, look here for instructions on how to set this thing. Always, don't ever say it failed unless you're going to say, now do this afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's kind of the best thing that you can do. And if the user can't do anything after an error, it's okay to tell them that. You know, like it's like if your internet connection is down, just, your internet is down. Please wait and try again later or something. You know, like always set their expectation of what you expect from them. You as the developer expect from the user for your whatever you've created to keep working to help that user.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So the next question is actually a follow up. So you just mentioned the importance about mentorship. What are some key lessons you've learned as a mentor and as a mentee? And how do you approach mentoring others? And what advice do you give to someone that is just starting with software engineering? I think we answered
Yeah,
part of this question already.
yeah. I I love to talk a lot, and I do repeat myself a lot.
No, don't
So
say
you'll
that.
have to forgive me. But I would say is when you're a mentor, shut your mouth and listen. Like a lot of people, it's very easy to tell someone what to do, but I think most people they don't often have as much trouble knowing what to do as kind of getting themselves to do it, you know? Like if you call someone lazy,
Mm-hmm.
they maybe they feel lazy already or something, right? That's not helpful. What you should be saying instead is like, do you need anything to do this thing? You know,
Mm-hmm.
how can I
Mm-hmm.
help you with this? So when mentoring, I try to always be like a counsel for that person, you know, like it's like with a lawyer, like um the person on trial, you know, like what they do decides whether their thing goes well or not. And the
Mm-hmm.
lawyer is there to advise them and say, I think you should do this. This would be your best strategy. And that's the same thing with being a mentor.
Mm.
Um, you know, the mentee kind of sets the direction. They have to say, this is important to me. I want to learn about this, or I need help figuring out what I need to know. And then you help them do that.
Mm-hmm.
Don't ever jump into a situation and then assume that you understand like what needs to be done. Let
Mm-hmm.
them lead you and help them to do their thing. Don't just tell them what to do, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then as a mentee, I would say ask for help, you know,
Yeah.
like before we were recording, I was saying that like being bad at things is a good thing in a way because when you run into issues, that shows the other people working on this thing like, oh, we didn't think about this case or we should have done a better job. Because for every person that is struggling with something and speaks up about it, there are a lot more people that are struggling and don't speak up, you know? So when you are struggling, you can actually you're kind of doing a favor. You're helping people by asking them for help because if they're willing to learn, you are teaching them what is difficult, what is complex, what maybe needs to be simplified or worked on more with a project, you know? Um, because people of all sorts of skill levels and knowledge levels have to work on your software. And most software lives much longer than you'll be at your job or wherever working on it, you know? And so it's very important to understand what is complex and what is confusing. And you need new people to do that, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're the mentor, look out for those people and work with them. They'll help you out. And if you are those people, look out for mentors and try and talk about the difficulties you're having because it helps you and it helps them. You know, you'll learn something and they'll learn something too.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then the other one is really is both, but as a mentee or as a new person, just write everything down. You don't have to keep everything in your head. You pretty much always have an opportunity to type or write things. And if you type it out on a computer, it can be very easy to find that stuff later. You ever have a question about, HTTP protocols, you can just search HTTP protocols. And if you've been recording your conversations with people in some way, you'll see, oh yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that we talked about this. And even if you don't remember what they said, if you at least write down that you spoke to someone about that
Mm-hmm.
and that it was helpful, then you know, oh, I'll go back to that person.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
just write it down. Don't worry about remembering. Write it down.
Mm-hmm. I want to add one more question. Let's say you are a beginner in software engineering, right? But you don't have a company you work for, so let's assume that you don't have a job. How do you find a person that will like agree to mentor you? Do you think it's okay to like basically reach out to people and find them and ask them, can you like mentor me? Can you like help me out? Do you think that's like a good approach, or do you
I
advise
think if
something
you
else?
do, it's going to be kind of exhausting for the both of you. Like
Mm-hmm.
a lot of software developers are very introverted, and so it's hard to ask, and it's also sometimes hard for people to be asked because they're like, "Oh no, another person. I don't want to." But I don't really. I think it's relatively harmless to ask. They can
Mm-hmm.
always say no. It's not
Mm-hmm.
a big deal. I mean, they don't
Mm-hmm.
even have to answer necessarily, although it'd be nice if they did. Um, I would say that finding meetups and things like that is great because kind of everyone that comes to the meetup is kind of coming there to learn and be part of something.
Mm-hmm.
So people will be much more receptive in those spaces than if you're just kind of cold calling or reaching out to people online. But with things like Discord and Zulip, it's now easier than ever to kind of casually reach out to someone.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, go on the Rust Discord. I bet they have a mentorship channel, and if not, ask them to create one. Like
Mm-hmm.
you you can find people if you ask, but asking is the hardest part.
Mm-hmm.
So just ask, but
Don't
also
be
yeah,
shy.
go to meetup.
Yeah,
Don't
and
be shy, or
yeah,
be
yeah.
shy, but do it anyways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let's move on to next question. Okay, so this is a good question actually. Compared to other major companies, AWS has been strong supporter of Rust for quite some time now, and we've been talking about and mentioned Rust quite a lot. Why do you think AWS is so in love with Rust? And how do you see the adoption of Rust evolving in the industry over the next few years?
Yeah. I can, of course, only speak as an
Mm-hmm.
individual and not a representative of AWS in this case. Disclaimer.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would say that Rust is very important. So right now, the world kind of runs on C, and C has memory issues. When people write C, it is not uncommon for them to write memory issues of some sort, memory related bugs. And in Rust, many of those are avoided. The White House, I think it was, put out guidance recently saying that we recommend that people use languages that are memory safe for whatever reason. You know, something like JavaScript where you don't even touch memory, or something like Rust where a lot of memory bugs are completely prevented in almost every case, unless you're using unsafe. But even then, it's still better. So I would say that when the government recommends something, that's sort of a prelude to them eventually requiring it. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they're telling people to get ready because in the future it's not going to be considered acceptable to write code in unsafe languages. So I would say that because of that, Rust has sort of been chosen, or maybe not even Rust specifically, but memory safe languages have been chosen. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that whatever language you're using, if it's not a memory safe one, you should consider learning a memory safe one. Um, I would say that's the most important thing. From my opinion, Rust is also just friendlier than C in a lot of ways. I mean, anyone that's used Rust, I think, has experienced that the compiler will not only note that you've made a mistake, but tell you what you should do to fix the mistake, you know? So I think in that way, Rust can be very friendly to newer programmers, although it does take a lot of time to get used to. Um, as to Amazon like using Rust, I think Rust is just great. I mean, it captures a lot of issues at compile time instead of at runtime. And I think that that is why companies like AWS and Google and Microsoft choose to use it because it's much cheaper to catch those problems before you ship
Mm-hmm.
them, you know, when
Mm-hmm.
you're compiling instead of after. To do it then it makes monitoring and everything else that much easier because then there's a whole class of problems that you don't ever have to look out for or think about, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Additionally, I think Rust is a very explicit language. And because programmers spend so much more time reading code than writing it, I think that Rust is great because I find it very easy to read. And I imagine that other people feel that way as well.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it's not like there's a lot of implicit global state or anything like you might have in something like Java. I like that when I look at a Rust file, I can basically see everything in that file other than imports from like a prelude,
Mm-hmm.
basically. Um, but yeah, I would say those are the reasons.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, I mean, obviously, I have no idea why AWS would choose Rust, but from all the clouds I have interacted with, like three main ones, GCP, Azure, and AWS, AWS was always so like open about it. Like Firecracker, it's also on GitHub, written
Yeah.
in Rust. So I don't know. I was always like, even like the SDK. Currently, AWS is the only one that has like official SDK for Rust. And yeah, I was also reading like a lot of articles that are published and written by Rust. I think you've also like
Yeah,
authored.
I probably wrote one.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think you also authored one. So yeah, I don't know. It's really cool. It's really cool because um, I mean, when you're into Rust and you want to like use something and you don't have support for it, it's obviously really difficult. But since AWS supports it, it's super nice. So we're gonna talk about Rust stuff a little bit more. Um, oh, actually, next question is literally about the SDK stuff. So this question was actually asked by a person in our local Tbilisi Rust community, and they really wanted to ask you: is there communication between different SDK teams, particularly in attempts to make them uniform? Do you have common guidelines for different SDKs, as an example? And how do these communications influence the development and consistency of the SDKs across different languages?
Yes. So we do try and keep things consistent. Um, I will point out that we kind of view the CLI and the SDKs to be separate. And so I want to make sure that we don't necessarily try to keep these SDKs and the CLI in
Mm-hmm.
line because we think that they kind of serve different purposes. But all the SDKs, we do want them to be similar because it's very common for someone to be using more than one SDK. So
Mm-hmm.
there is a lot of communication every week between the different teams, especially if there are problems, because if we encounter a problem on one team, it's often that we will encounter it on other teams. And so we've put a lot of
Mm-hmm.
time and effort into sharing that information. Additionally, we write a lot of documents at Amazon, and we kind of have our own version of RFCs, or request for comments, basically documents saying there is some need or there is some problem. This is how it is for users now. This is how it should be for users in the future. This is an improvement, and
Mm-hmm.
then this is how you implement it. And so we can't define everything incredibly specifically because languages can be so different. Like again, in JavaScript, you don't have memory management, so there's not necessarily going to be guidance on memory management.
Mm-hmm.
But for things like how the SDKs are configured, and the way that people are able to extend them and so on, we try to keep them similar while at the same time remaining idiomatic to Rust. So, like, one of the examples is that in the Rust SDK, all SDKs have to provide some method for observability, the ability
Mm-hmm.
to understand, like, what requests am I sending, when, how long does each one take to get out, how much time am I spending on serialization or deserialization, things like that. Every SDK has a duty to expose that information to the user somehow. Um, and a lot of them have to kind of write their own APIs for doing that. However,
Mm-hmm.
in Rust, we just use tracing, which is a very common library for doing async logging.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, we're doing something that's unique to Rust, but it still meets that overarching need that has been defined. That makes
Mm-hmm.
sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
So it's just that, just constant talking, reviewing, planning together, making documents.
mm-hmm. Follow up to that question is, does the Rust SDK team think of doing two layers of SDK like Boto Core and Boto? Low level for all services, higher level with better UX for some services. What are the main challenges in designing and maintaining these different layers within the SDK?
I think that, for one, yes, we do have different abstractions, although they don't directly map to Boto Core and Boto. Um, Pretty much all of the SDKs right now are code generated. And that
Mm-hmm.
is to say that there is some sort of model of a service's API, that you can talk to with HTTP calls. And uh, we write code generators that look at these API definitions and then create a client sort of on the fly. Well, in the Rust case, we create it once. In the case of Go V1, they would actually do it on the fly, but that was
Mm-hmm.
actually really slow. So the Go V2 doesn't work like that. Um, but we have to maintain speed. Amazon has a policy of two pizza teams, which I believe is public. I hope it is. And so you can't really count on your team scaling forever. Instead, you have a lot of pressure to figure out how to scale things. And so a lot of that is,
Mm,
how do we automate all these processes? We can't write this stuff by hand. So how do we generate it? Um, it's very hard to, it's hard. We're essentially writing a compiler, like we are
mm-hmm.
writing a thing that takes some format of code and spits out another. And it's kind of confusing to talk about sometimes. When people ask me what I do, I say I write code that writes code so that other people that have to write code can use that to write their code, and then maybe there's an app at the end.
Mm-hmm.
you know.
And before you continue, all of this is written in Rust. So the code generation, what generates?
So our code generator is open source for the Rust SDK. We call
Mm,
it Smithy-RS. And if you go to on GitHub, I believe the organization is Smithy and the repo is Smithy RS. So
mm-hmm.
Smithy/Smithy RS. And you can see it. And so this is what I was trying to get to. Um, for us, we have this conception of different kinds of Smithy clients. Smithy is not Amazon specific, but when
Mm,
we make clients for the SDKs, we customize them in a way so that they become Amazon specific. And if you look at Smithy, it does list a lot of the Amazon specific things that we do for request signing and things like that. They're all defined in the model. And So my team is generating these SDKs and with a bunch of AWS customizations. However, it is possible, right now our guides are only internal for this, but it is possible to make your own model and your own clients that don't have these things. I know that, I know that some other companies are using Smithy, and I imagine that they have to do this. Theoretically, if you have a Smithy model, you can use our current code generator to make your own SDK for your
Mm-hmm.
own thing. If you do signing differently or if you have different protocols, you'll have to probably implement certain parts of it. But like the configuration and all that and building requests and sending them will have handled it for you. So it is possible, but it's not something that we've really focused on right now.
Mm-hmm.
We used to be focused on it a little more, but then trying to get to 1.0 kind of took up all of our time and energy, so we did that instead. But I do foresee a future where people can kind of define their own models and then instantly have a client in Rust for it if they choose to use Smithy as their IDL
Mm-hmm.
interface definition language.
Mm-hmm. And I'll cut it out if I'm not supposed to ask this. Is the team? I think the team is quite small, right? I think it's only four of you that are working on SDK itself.
I don't know if I'm allowed to say. Let's see, Amazon
Because I remember
size.
there was like I also saw your picture. It was four people. You were one of them. When the official SDK was released, I think there was like a blog
Mhm.
post that was made. So yeah, okay, let's.
I can say at that time, yes, the people whose pictures you saw were the programmers on the team. And that Amazon does have a possible or what do you call it? A policy.
Mm-hmm.
Amazon does have a policy of these smaller teams because uh, they they kind of want you to be scrappy. They they put pressure on you because that's kind of how you breed innovation, right? Like if someone is
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable, they will work to make themselves more comfortable. And so Amazon is always sort of trying to kind of push you to innovate in that way. And that's why we have to do so much automation so that a team of some smaller size, a team where you can't count on it growing forever, you have to be, to be able to provide all these things. Amazon has like almost 400 different services, I think,
Mm-hmm.
available
Mm-hmm.
now. And that would be a lot for like you could start a company and all they do
Mm-hmm.
is do that. Um, so we have to fight a lot to kind of make it possible for us to continue doing this thing, to limit the scope of what we're doing, so that we are able to automate things.
And do you think? I mean, it's open source, obviously, and there are a lot
Yep,
of contributors. Do you think like the contributors also help out, to like let's say
they
ease your
do.
work? Right. Right.
Yes, yes, but I think that the hardest thing is that the thing that we're doing is very complex. Again, like we're almost writing a compiler, and a lot of um, a lot of the work that we do, like there's public work that we do, and then there is stuff that is driven by more internal needs.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very I'm trying to think of a way to communicate it. We have to maintain this balance between that stuff, and we have to ensure that it never gets too complex, in terms of like what we can do for people. We have to do a lot of work to well, basically, not all optimizations can happen on the service side. And so there are a lot of times that we need to do things on the user side, and that is difficult. And furthermore, we have to do this in a way that it's completely generic and that it works through code gen. So we don't write serializers and deserializers. We have to write generators for them. And
Mm-hmm.
if we need to change how we're doing it, we need to change this higher order thing instead of just changing the code. And the same thing for authentication and so on. So we put a lot of effort into figuring out what parts we can handwrite and then kind of insert into the thing versus which ones we have to generate. And right now, a lot of that is code generated. I would love for it to be less code generated, but it's very difficult. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I didn't answer the question. I don't even remember the question now.
It's
Yeah.
fine. It's fine. And also, I wait. Let me check. What's the next question about? Okay, I'll ask you the next question. And I wanted to mention that, like the talk you did, I forgot for which meetup it was, but you talked about like the SDK and you touched like the code generation part really well. I'll put like a link also for people to check that out because it was a really good video.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I think it was for Linz in Switzerland. I don't.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. Uh,
Austria.
Austria. Yeah, sorry. Um, okay, next question is also about the SDK. Are there any upcoming features or improvements in the Rust SDK that you're particularly excited about? And also, how do you as a team gather and prioritize feedback from the community to inform these updates or just change something for what the community wants?
Yeah. So we released our 1.0 at the beginning of the year, and that was
Mm-hmm.
really important because a lot of people were asking for that. However, when we released it, I mean, there were a lot of things that we couldn't do in time,
Mm-hmm.
and the Rust community itself is not all at 1.0, so to speak. So, like, for example, we depend on Tokyo as our kind of included runtime, although it's possible to use other ones. And we use Hyper as our
Mm-hmm.
HTTP client. Tokyo, I don't remember when they went 1.0, but that was like maybe a year and a half ago. Hyper only just went 1.0 at like the beginning of the year. And in that case, they still have pre 1.0 crates related to Hyper that we need to rely on.
Mm-hmm.
So we our team has run into a lot of issues that I think anyone doing enterprise Rust and producing libraries is going to run into. And I think that the reason that these issues exist is simply that Rust is a lot more mature now than it used to be, and it's in use by a lot of corporations that have much stricter needs. Um, I would say I'm really excited about a couple of things, though. One, we're focusing on the user experience mostly for this year. And I really like that aspect because I really like thinking about the user experience. We want to make it easier to use. We're also looking at performance improvements and things like that because we do really, really want Rust to be fast. We want it to be
Mm-hmm.
competitive with the C implementation. And we've done a lot of things where it makes that a little bit harder sometimes. That is to say that in Rust, because of the way that polymorphism is achieved with traits and generics, sometimes it is possible to make something that is completely customizable, but that is so complex that it is very difficult for most humans to
Mm-hmm.
actually use it to customize things. And so we have to walk this fine line of how do we enable users to do almost anything that they would want while still making it useful for the vast majority of users that are
Mm-hmm.
not Rust experts, you know? So focusing on UX and performance and compile times too is a big part of that. So we're looking to be one, checking and tracking all that stuff and then publishing it probably, and then improving it over time. And some of that is also going to come from the Rust community. The Rust compiler gets a little faster every time an update comes out and so on. And Hyper is going to get better. We just have to be careful about we can't expose pre 1.0 types from other libraries in our public API because then we can't change them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in many cases, if we have an HTTP implementation or even things related to Tokyo, we have to decide is this something that can be switched out or not, you know, and figure out how that works. And that's very difficult. So we're always working on that stuff and we're, looking at like what can we make better now, what we'll have to wait for version 2. But yeah, basically better user experience is the thing that I'm most excited about. There's another cool thing, but I don't know if it's public yet, that we're trying to get out maybe by the end of the year. Um, but I can't speak about that one. I
Yeah.
don't think it's public yet.
I'll ask you a final question. Um,
Yeah.
I think.
Oh, wait. Before that, you asked how we gather and prioritize
Oh
feedback.
yeah, yeah. True.
So I forgot about that one. So GitHub is the biggest one. Sometimes people email us, but
Mm-hmm.
mostly GitHub. We are right now, Amazon is specifically the SDK org is going through this big initiative to try and make GitHub much more useful to customers as a window into what we're actually working on instead of just a pile of everything that we could possibly work on. Um, so GitHub is the best way to talk to us mostly,
Mm-hmm.
creating discussions there, creating issues there. We try to be very quick about responding to those things. Um, I, every time I'm on call, I have to respond to like one or two issues a day, it feels like. And that's probably the best way to reach us. But we also do talk to customers through people that have premium AWS services,
Mm-hmm.
because they can talk to us through their customer support representatives. And then, of course, we also talk to a lot of internal users about how they're using the SDK and what they need. And we are also open to talking to, bigger users outside of AWS. But yeah, talking on GitHub or sending us an email is probably the best way to get a hold of us. And we do really try and respect what users say they want.
Mm-hmm.
So users, of course, want a bunch of different things, but it's possible to upvote issues on GitHub, like a little thumbs up. And we do take that into account. We do try to. Um, it's tough though, right? Because half of our prioritization is always going to be hidden because it's an internal thing,
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, we have to kind of balance those two things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is also final question about this topic. Who writes the documentation? Do you have like
Uh,
a
everyone.
really?
So yeah, there are. Amazon is a very writing heavy culture.
Mm-hmm.
We do often work with docs writers and such to kind of edit things, but a lot of the documentation does come from our team. Although there is an examples team that also writes code examples because we couldn't keep up with how many we'd have to write for all the different services. Um, but I would say that the people writing the docs are most often the people on our team, and that's bad because we know the SDK really, really well. And that means it's not always easy for us to understand what is and isn't obvious to people outside it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I would love to hear more feedback on the docs. We do get it sometimes. Um, but there are two sources of docs. The ones that we have the most control over and are easiest for us to change are the cargo docs that are generated for every Rust package that's uploaded to crates.io, or at least almost every single one. And then we also have the developer guide. And we're actually, our developer guide has kind of gotten out of date, even though we only published it like at the beginning of the year, because we've just been changing so many things and bringing new features in. So we are currently working on improving that a lot, and I'm really excited to see that. I just finished working on a big section on concurrency, and it's interesting. I could talk about documentation for so long because I love it, but we have to kind of some people coming to Rust are coming to Rust for the first time. And so not only do we have to
Mm-hmm.
educate them in the way that AWS works, but sometimes we also have to educate them in the way that Rust works.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are trying to we're trying to balance between teaching people the SDKs and teaching people the useful parts of Rust that they need to know to actually use them. Um, but it's tough. I always wish I could write more, and I often think that I'm kind of too explanatory in the docs when I should probably point to someone else's resources, that they maintain. Because again, our two pizza teams, if we're writing docs, then we're not necessarily programming a thing or something. We have to take care how much time we spend on any given thing, whether we're making new features or we're explaining how to use them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's just tough.
But it's really good. I mean, it's
Yeah,
really considerate, you know?
yeah.
Because people, like even me, I'm like in no way a Rust expert. It's just like something like a hobby level. So
Mhm.
actually, I love the documentation. I don't think I ever
Thank
struggle,
you.
but I usually check the crates.io. I don't think I've looked at the developer experience. Ah, sorry, I forgot
Yeah.
whatever it's called.
Developer guide, or
Guide, yeah,
I don't even
yeah. I don't
remember.
think I've
Yeah.
looked at that, but even the examples they're really well written, and the documentation
Hmm.
for me, like someone that is in no way a Rust expert, they're really good. They're really good.
Yeah.
They're really
The
understandable.
examples, we have a lot of awesome examples, and almost all of those have been written by David Souther, who just does a really awesome job. I I kind of wish that we could steal them for our team instead of them working to write examples all the time. But yeah, if you see a great example for the SDK, thank David Souther.
Hmm.
They're wonderful.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay, so we're done with the SDKs, and this is actually the last question. Um, so looking back at your career, what are you most proud of in your work? This is a really difficult question. And what advice would you give to someone just starting to learn Rust and looking to contribute to open source projects?
Yeah, I think that this is it's sort of a funny question to ask me. I'll explain. I I'm always hesitant to take too much pride in my career because
Mm-hmm.
I only have so much control over it, you know? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that many people that come into software have experienced a thing where they thought something was really important, but they have trouble convincing other people of that. And it can be very frustrating at those times to see it's almost like seeing something on fire and no one else can see it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I try to maintain a certain amount of kind of distance between work and my pride, I guess. I I try to take pride in my creations, but it's usually the creations that I make for my personal website or the art that I make and things like that, because I find that stuff to be more dependable and more in my control. Um, I think the thing about if you take too much pride in your work, you give a lot of power to whoever is paying you. And
Mm-hmm.
that is a dangerous thing. So like I would say that if you are a new person doing programming, um, don't work on something you don't enjoy. You know, like it's very hard to care about things if you don't actually like that thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say it can be hard to do a good job if you don't care. But also be careful about what you care about because this job is a marathon and not a sprint, you know? It's not enough to do a good job for 1 year. You have to do a good job for, I don't know, 30 or 40 or however many years you're going to be working, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of new people that come into this profession, there are a lot of businesses that will kind of, uh, they will let them run themselves out, you know? They will let them burn themselves out because the business hasn't really invested that much in that person at that point because they are so new. And I've seen a lot of new people work way harder than they should and run out of energy and end up hating the job. So I think it's very important to set boundaries of what you will and won't do and when and how much work you're going to do. Um, the one I always show people, I feel bad because maybe it's unprofessional, but there's I love Star Trek, and there's a specific episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation, I think, or maybe it was Voyager. Oh no, it must be Voyager. Well, no, I can't remember. I'm sure some Star Trek nerd is going to get mad that I didn't remember. Anyhow, they meet a ship's engineer named Scotty from the original Star Trek show, and he says that starship captains are like children. You don't give them what they want, you give them what they need, and only that.
Mm.
If you give 80% all the time, then when they really need you, you can finally give 100% and kind of wow them. But if you're always running at 100%, you can't give any more than that, you know?
Mm.
Like
And they're
to
going to
me,
expect more.
right, yeah. And especially at a place like Amazon, Amazon is very good at asking for more, you know? And if you don't have boundaries and if you're not able to say no, you know, if you're not able to separate out the good worthwhile work from the work that's less valuable and you try and do it all, it's I don't think you can do it. I think some people maybe could, but I couldn't, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to put a lot of thought into kind of how much I take on my shoulders
Mm-hmm.
and so on. The other thing I'd say is that contributing to open source, um, every time you contribute, it's not only work for you, but it's also work for the maintainer. And I think that kind of like with being a mentor, it's very, I think people have this inclination to jump into a situation and say, this needs to be done. Um, but really, like, you should be asking the maintainer or the mentee,
Mm.
like the person that you're helping, start with them and ask them what they need, you know? And maybe they've, in some open source projects, the person has already listed out, like, oh, I need people to work on these things. This is a good first issue, and so on. But just know that, like, um, they want your help, but they also have to help you. They have to review your PR. They'll have to explain certain things to you. And so you'll be doing them a lot bigger service if you actually allow them to kind of direct what you're doing. Um, because they may have a better idea of what's important than you. It's not to say that, maybe there is a feature that is really specifically important to you and you want to work on it. That's fine. But just know that at some point, like, that maintainer will have to review it and
Mm-hmm.
merge it in. And if it's a complex thing, it could take a long time. Um, I feel really bad every time that people do work for our project because I mean, unless they're getting paid, but like, this thing basically serves this giant corporation, Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're doing unpaid labor for them, maybe that's one way to get a job, but I I really don't think that people should be putting themselves in the position of doing unpaid labor like that. Um, so just, yeah, be be really careful with your boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely you want to move up quickly, but just make sure that your efforts are being seen by the person that you need them to be seen by, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Everything that you work on, you have to have a way of explaining it and showing it to that person. And basically just make sure that if you are going to work on someone else's project, that you kind of take something away from it that you can use to kind of get yourself farther along in your career. Um, oh, last thing, read the Rust book. Just like
Mm-hmm.
reread it sometimes. It's a really good book. They add new stuff every once in a while, like especially chapters 15 through 18. Um, Learn the difference between, like, learn what the static lifetime really is. Um, Learn about the issues with traits and why they can be difficult. Um, Things like that. Uh, Basically, just keep reading about Rust and trying it out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I also wanted to ask you, maybe I'm wrong, but from my perspective, I think you have good work and leisure. I don't know how they call it. Balance, right?
Yeah, like a work-life balance.
Yeah, work-life
Uh,
balance.
I think if I had my way, I would never work, maybe, or at least I would never work for someone else. But I I'm very interested in working like a 4-day work week. I think that things can be even better. I think that as a worker, it can be very hard for people to advocate for yourself, you know? Often you won't get promoted unless you ask for it. You won't have better working conditions unless you ask for it. And it's very hard for people, especially when they feel like they don't have power personally, to ask for more from some big organization, you know? Um, Always ask for more. Always be saying, when's my promotion?
Mm-hmm.
What do you need me to just demonstrate for me to get paid more? How big is my raise going to be? Things like that. It feels weird to ask that stuff, but you have to get good at it, or else people will take advantage of you, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so always, always ask for more, you know, until I never have to work a day in my life except on things I want to, I won't be happy. Um, because there are so many beautiful things I could be doing. The SDK is wonderful, but I wouldn't mind making art all the time or
Mm-hmm.
working on a game full time, you know?
Or spending
But
more
so
time
long as
with
I
your
have,
wife, as an example, or with your
yes,
family.
yes, I love my wife. If you, To me, work is a means to an end. I work because I want food and housing and healthcare for me and the people I care about. If I could get those things another way, I probably would. And I think that at some point in my life, I want to kind of soft retire, I want to
Yeah.
stop working before I have to, because there are so many things in my life that are so much more important to me than my career. I think if at the end of my life, all I had to show for it was creating value for shareholders, I would be very sad, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's more to life than that. So don't lose sight of what's actually important to you, you know? You will have to put aside some of your dreams and so on when you take on a career because you have to kind of embody the dreams of whoever you're working for, you know? Um, and I understand that, but make sure that you don't keep that boundary between yourself and your work, um, because maybe you won't be a programmer forever. You don't have to be, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Fit whoever you are, be that person. That person may change over time, and that's okay. Um, Change is good, and try not to worry too much about other people's, problems. Like take care of other people that are close to you instead
Mm-hmm.
of worrying about people that sit on yachts and drink fancy drinks at your expense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, wow. Yeah, I feel like not only is your talk like insightful, but I think you're giving me like life lessons right now, as someone that is like only 2 years into my career. So I think I can learn a lot from like what you're telling me right now. And like you're absolutely correct. I never even thought about some of the things you mentioned before. You know. So
Yeah.
yeah, actually, I don't have any more questions. I think I asked you everything. So yeah, thank you again for like taking your time, and also maybe you have something you want to ask me. If not, that's also fine.
I do have one thing. I would like to say, when I see a lot of newer people, well, when I see a lot of people debugging programs, don't think, just look. Like,
Mm-hmm.
don't. There are many, many times where you have a choice between developing a whole theory of how something works, or you can just look at the pipe and see that the water is coming out of this hole. Like, um, it it is often much faster to just go look at where the problem is than to imagine what the problem could be. I would also say, um, consider reading The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman. We aren't industrial designers. We're not designing teapots and doors and so on, but there is a lot of there are a lot of lessons from older styles of design that apply to software, specifically software that has users. And almost every software has a human user at some
Mm-hmm.
point. Even if you're writing a library, a human has to use that library to accomplish what they wanted, and you have to keep them in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. And I think that I would say that if anyone is interested in working for Amazon or wants to know what it's like, you can always ask me, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's on LinkedIn or Discord, or you can send me an email. Um, are you going to be able to go to RustConf this year? It's pretty far
uh
away.
where is it exactly? I don't remember.
I believe it's in Montreal this year in
No, no,
September.
no way, no way. I think
Ah,
there's also one like closer in Europe, or maybe it was just right now. I don't remember. I have to check.
they do have European ones. I
Yeah,
never looked
yeah.
because I would be so sleepy if I had to fly to Europe. But that would actually be really cool.
No,
Um,
no. I wish though, but yeah, waiting for visa to Canada and United States when you're located in Georgia, it takes 1 year to apply for the interview. So yeah, I don't think so.
True.
It's too
That's
much
true.
to wait.
Ugh, I wish that was easier. Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, yeah, you're correct. It's in Montreal in September. Wow. Are you thinking to attend? Are you thinking
Oh
to
yeah, I'm
go?
gonna go.
Oh yeah.
Amazon's gonna pay, so I'll go. If I had to pay my own, I don't know if I'd go, but I mean, if Amazon is paying, I'm definitely gonna go. And
Yeah.
it's also very good. It's a chance for us to talk to customers firsthand,
Mm-hmm.
especially in a much more casual setting,
Mm-hmm.
where like, yeah, it's just you can learn a lot from anecdotes, and you get very good anecdotes when you talk to Rust developers in person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. True, true, true. It's also why I love Rust meetups in general.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you once again for taking your time, and I'll be stopping the recording.